right, so welcome everyone to our name change webinar about entitled Ask Us Anything, Updating Your Legal Name and Gender Marker. We're excited to be here with you all. My name is Kelsey Grunstra. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the Communications and Fundraising Manager at the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition, and that is a big mouthful. So I'm going to be the host and moderator this evening, and I'm just going to be, before I pass it off to our panelists to introduce themselves, I would like to provide two disclaimers for this evening. One, nothing in this event is formal legal advice. We are providing recommendations and best practices in this webinar, so do not take any of this as it is any official legal advice. The second thing I would like to say is that since this webinar is being recorded, everything that we're sharing is valid and up-to-date information as of today, August 23rd, 2022, and anything that happens after this might change some of the laws or procedures, so some of this information might be out of date at some point in the future if you're viewing this after today. So I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Chris.
Hi everyone. I'm Chris Urchel. I am an attorney with GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders, which is better known as GLAD. We're based in Boston, and we're an LGBTQ legal advocacy organization that serves all of New England. And we have a really amazing hotline called GLAD Answers, where we take calls from people around New England who are experiencing issues related to discrimination or, domestic family related issues, anything where you might need legal help. We encourage everyone to reach out to our hotline, and we will try to connect you with whatever resources and support we can. And so that's GLAD Answers. And through GLAD Answers, we have a transgender ID project that we run along with MTPC, and it connects people with legal help for the purposes of name changes and ID changes across New England, and we have a group of really amazing attorneys who do this work pro bono, and they have guidance and support from the lawyers at GLAD, which is just really great. It's been working well since 2017 as a way to connect people with resources, and there are other people with resources here too. But that's all I have to say about who I am. So it's nice to be here, and it's nice to see you all.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to pass it off to Miriam next.
Hi, my name is Miriam Burke. I'm an attorney also. I've been in private practice for about 20 years, handling family cases and name changes, but most recently, a couple months ago, began working for the Massachusetts trial court. So I don't practice anymore. I'm not allowed to practice. But as Kelsey was saying, I am allowed to give information, and I am part of a nonprofit called GIVES, the Gender Identity Validation Services. This is just a family nonprofit that we started a couple of years ago, and we do two primary sort of areas. My husband and a psychologist colleague of his do assessments for letters of support for folks who need that for insurance or for medical treatment. And they're both psychologists. And then we also do name changes and assist people and advocate for them in various capacities to do the legal name change and to help with the other documents that they might want to modify or change for their gender markers, or to change their names on like Social Security, birth records, driver's licenses, that kind of thing. So we sometimes connect and refer to GLAD and get support from them and their lawyers because they're pretty awesome. We're located in Northampton, so most of our work is in Western Mass. And that's pretty much what we're doing. And now we're sort of networking with some other organizations too to really try to figure out how to help each other do this work.
Thanks, Miriam. I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Drew next.
Hi, Drew Cronin. I go by Drew or Dr. Drew, pronouns he and him. I'm a pediatrician at Transhealth Northapmton. And I'm going to let my colleague Brooke introduce more of who we are. But I just want to say, when I first became a pediatrician, I loved writing school notes for people to get out of school. And now I love doing these letters because I think it is ridiculous that people need letters to change their name and their gender marker. And until we can get that changed, I will write those for anyone who needs one, within the standard of the law, of course.
Thanks, Drew. So with what you said, I'll pass it off to Brooke.
Thanks, Kelsey. I'm Brooke. I use she, her pronouns. I am a clinical social worker doing outpatient therapy and community engagement and support services at Transhealth Northapmton. In addition to mental health services, obviously we offer pediatric primary care and hormone management, which Drew does. We also offer adults primary care hormone management. We have some peer support groups. We have like a community closet for donations and a bunch of other services. And yeah, that's what we do.
Okay, and then last but not least, Luke.
Hey everybody, I'm Luke Lennon. I use he and they pronouns, primarily flexible in pronouns. This past summer, about a year ago, actually launched Namesake Collaborative, which is a affirming accessible platform to streamline the legal name and gender marker change process. We're working with MTPC to pilot this in Massachusetts and ideally expand to more states. I'll provide a little bit more info later in the session about how you can get involved if you're interested. We're currently beta testing the platform through the rest of summer into early fall. So excited to share more.
All right, thank you, Luke. So we're going to get started with our panel. So the first question I'm going to ask, which is basically for everyone on the panel, is what should someone do to prepare for the legal name and gender marker change process? Anyone like to go first?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Miriam.
And then Luke, because our work dovetails. It gives me a chance also just to clarify that even though I'm not representing clients and can't in court, we have a panel of attorneys who do this kind of work. And I would say, to answer the question about what can I do to prepare, if it's for the legal name change, it's going to be getting a certified copy of your birth certificate and also certified copies of any other name changes that you've had, either a legal name change or marriage certificate or divorce certificate. Anything that has sort of changed your legal name, you're going to need that to file. And I would say that Luke has this amazing website that will sort of also clarify like what you need. And it's going to depend on what sort of part of the process you're looking for, but that's the most important thing first.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that and say, like, I guess it depends, like, this is an opportunity to define like what we mean by the process. And that can look very different for a range of individuals, whether you're married or divorced, you have children, you don't have children, you may be incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, right? So there's like a variety of backgrounds and experiences that kind of do slightly alter the process and what you need to do to prepare. But in addition to like the formal paperwork, I would also say like just budget like emotional bandwidth and time to do this process, because it's not quick, generally speaking, and also, can be expensive. So you'll want to think about budget. And we'll probably cover some of the financial resources available to people in Massachusetts. But I think those pieces, in addition to the formal pieces of like how to prepare, are really important to consider too.
Yeah, I think it's really important to, review some checklists. There's, I know GLAD has like kind of a checklist resource. MTPC has a checklist resource, which is just has a kind of a recommended like process and order. And I think kind of just reviewing documents like that, just to see like what are all the things I might need, or and a lot of these documents also will share like, this is what you need to send in. This is what where you're gonna have to go in person. So I think just looking over some of these documents will give you a good idea of like things that you might have to have.
Can I throw out something really quickly that you don't have to do to start? You do not need to start hormones. You do not need to get the surgery, whatever that means.
No.
All you have to do from a medical standpoint is exist.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
That is a good point. I'm sorry, also just one more thing is to be mindful of how helpful it can be to do a sort of, once you do a legal name change, to then go ahead and do these other changes for your personal records, for your driver's license, your passport, social security. I think it feels safest and most helpful if your documents are all consistent. I think it will lead to fewer questions or, problems if names and gender markers are different on different documents.
Can I add a couple of caveats to both what Dr. Drew just said and what Miriam just said? First, I agree with Dr. Drew that you shouldn't have to ask, you shouldn't have to show any kind of medical documentation or anything like that to be able to update your identification documents. But unfortunately, in much of the country, that's still something that's required. And, and fortunately, if you were born in Massachusetts and your all your documents are Massachusetts-based IDs, then you don't have to prove that you've been on any kind of hormone therapy or undergone any other kind of medical transition. But I will just note that there are some states that have outdated laws, and if you're trying to change your birth certificate from a state like that, you might not be able to do so without submitting some kind of evidence of medical transition. And generally speaking, we hope that doesn't end up coming to proving that you've had any kind of specific surgery or anything like that. Hopefully we're just looking for, a more generalized statement. But like in New Hampshire, you're still required to submit some kind of a doctor's note that says you've undergone transition. And so that can be really, really demoralizing to have to, go that direction. But it's something that's still required in some places, unfortunately. And we're, actively working across the country to try to change those kind of policies and laws. But that is kind of the state of things right now. So I just kind of want to flag that as an issue. And then Miriam, I can't remember what you were just saying, but I had a follow up to it. Can you recap what you just said for a second? Do you remember?
Sure. My concern is that you go ahead and get your name changed legally in court, but then you have inconsistent other documents or identification documents. And I worry about that and would encourage people to kind of change everything, not necessarily at exactly the same time, but to not wait too long.
Right. And the biggest caveat that I have to that statement, which I also agree with, that having consistent documents can be really, important and helpful to people as they're navigating complex life situations. There's also this issue where a lot of states, including Massachusetts on the birth certificates, don't recognize X markers as a valid gender marker as of yet. And so that's going to mean that if you need an X marker on your driver's license, you might end up having inconsistent documents just by virtue of the fact that it's not available everywhere. So that's just something else to flag. So to the extent that the law allows you to have consistent markers across identification documents, that's great, but sometimes that's not possible.
Thank you all. And just we have a question in the chat that is directly related to this topic, so I want to address it before we move on, which is, would a minor have to, for a name change for a minor, would there be any differences in the preparation versus someone who's an adult?
Is that for me to answer? I guess.
I mean, for anyone, but if you want to take it.
Sure. I think that people have a right to change their name. They can't, they're not limited to only being able to change it one time. For minors, the paperwork is different. The petition requires legal parents or guardians to approve, or to assent to the petition. So it's a different form, but I think there were the other requirements in terms of like a birth certificate and any other legal changes that you've already done or decrees would also need to be filed. I think the question was like, how many times can you change your name as a minor?
Yeah.
More than once. A lot of people think, at least in Massachusetts, you can only change it one time. I would say, well, I'm mentioning that your birth certificate is different. You can only amend your birth certificate really for purposes of changing your gender marker. You can't just keep changing it. I don't think you can change it at all just for your name. Chris maybe could clarify that, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, there's actually a bill that's like floating in the legislature that we were trying to get passed this year. Didn't happen. Hopefully it'll come back next year. That would kind of make those two processes independent, changing your name on your birth certificate and changing your gender marker. But right now they're tied together and you can only do it one time. It's like you change your gender marker and then at that same exact moment you have to change your name, otherwise you can't. And so presents a real challenge for a lot of people.
Okay, so there are other questions in the Q&A section that we'll save into the end. So I'm just gonna kind of move into the next question, which we've kind of already addressed. So I might just take it a little bit, which is, once you have all of your documents ready and you're ready to start the process, where should you start? And the first place to start is by getting the court order for your legal name change. That's kind of the first thing. I mean, that I know that there are some variances with this with certain forms of ID in different places, but in some places you can change your gender marker into, before you have a name change. So like if that is more important to you or if it's easier for you, you can go ahead and start that process a little separately. Chris, were you going to add something to that?
Yeah. Before, so when you go to file for a name change, you should look into whether or not the state where you were born. So if it's other than Massachusetts, but you're doing a name change in Massachusetts, you should look into whether or not the state where you were born requires a court-ordered gender marker change to update your birth certificate, because it's so much easier if you get those two documents at the same time from the court instead of trying to do them separately. So if you need to get a court-ordered gender change, then do that at the same time that you're doing the name change from the Massachusetts court.
That is a very good tip, Chris. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to the what's the first step question? Okay, so the next question, and this is a question that we've been seeing more of recently, which is, when you have your forms and your paperwork ready, should you submit it online, by mail, in person? Are there any differences or pros or cons to different methods of submitting your paperwork? Maybe not. Also, like, I think this question maybe comes up more so with the court order, but I think it applies for all of the documents.
I'm not trusting the mail so much right now in terms of timeliness and things getting where they need to go. I've just been really kind of either going into an office or some things you can do online. But the truth is that I think some folks have troubles with like a local clerk's office to do that birth certificate change. That, I have to say, we've been doing by mail. Social Security, for a period of time, the local offices were closed or not really easily accessible. So we did those by mail, and those worked out pretty well. I think, I bet it varies. And I don't know if Chris, if the experience you've had like in the Boston area, or Luke, if the experiences are different there, but for the most part, we're doing things in person if we can, but it's so much of it is office by office. So I don't know if it makes a big difference.
Yeah, personally speaking, I've had better results going in person. So much so that actually with Namesake, we're planning a field trip to courthouse to get a bunch of folks to go together, because it can be an intimidating place to walk into. But the benefits of going in person are usually if there's like something small that you need to change or add, you get that feedback directly versus waiting, weeks for a response for something that is frustratingly minor compared to the rest of the process, but can hold you back.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I'll just say, like, it can be really intimidating if you're on your own without a lawyer to walk into a courthouse. But Massachusetts Probate and Family Court, in every single county, like, there are staff there who are used to people coming in and doing things on their own, and they're used to helping you, walking you through everything you need. So yeah, bring a friend if you can for support, and then just go and ask all your questions and take as long as it takes. I mean, you might end up having to take a number and wait a long time to get, a clerk to help you, but once you do, I think it'll generally be worth it. And generally speaking, and this isn't always true, but generally speaking, staff at the family and probate court courthouses are just really friendly and supportive and helpful.
Yeah, one thing I'm going to add is, I changed my name legally a long time ago, but I remember I think this is a more so being Boston focused than anywhere else, which is if you're changing your information with the Social Security Administration in Boston, the office in downtown Boston is going to have very, very long in-person wait times almost all the time. I sat there for over 3.5 hours just to get my paperwork done there. So if you're in the Boston area or any other major metropolitan area and you're doing this, I definitely recommend trying to find a smaller Social Security Administration office. And the same can also potentially be true depending on how you are doing your passport. But that varies a lot based on location. So is there anything else about the in-person mail online? We have someone else in the chat who's saying that they only file as they're a law practitioner and they only file in person or online. And I definitely second/third that.
Yeah, and I also feel like when it comes to filing in court, I think in a lot of cases, they're pretty straightforward for name changes, but I still think and we certainly offer to represent people. We don't charge clients for our services. And I think folks are, because there are issues that can come up, there are questions that do come up. If you want to, in a name change, not have to publish the citation and have that in the newspaper, that's a separate document. That's a motion that needs to be filed. The language needs to be pretty particular to your situation. And having a lawyer sort of do that with you can be really helpful and reassuring. And maybe they'll do it for you so that, clients that I represent don't go into court. I just go in and file for them. And I agree. I always do all my filing in person. I have tried doing the e-filing, which you can do online now for name changes. I have not had a lot of success with that yet. I do agree about doing that in person.
Yeah. So this kind of perfectly transitions us into our next question, which is kind of our next two questions, which is, what can someone expect at the courthouse if they go in person? But I think also to add on to that, like if they have to go back for a hearing, what can they expect as a part of that process? You have recommendations for that?
Yeah, we try to avoid those if we can. Even in my regular practice, I have no problem going into court, talking to judges and making an argument and a pitch for my clients. In these cases, I really feel strongly that folks should not have to appear in court and present some reason for why they want their name change. And so it's two parts. There are two possible areas initially that you could have to go in for a hearing. One would be just on the petition for the name change. The courts can ask for a hearing if they have questions and they want to ask a person questions about their petition. Sometimes there are issues that they might be concerned about in terms of a criminal history or something. I don't, there are probably a bunch of things that might raise a red flag that lead them to want to do that, or just ignorance. And then the other area, it would be the motion to waive that publication. Sometimes those get scheduled for hearings, but I'm finding that most of the courts, at least around us, and most of the judges will waive the hearing on the petition for the name change. They just take in the paperwork and they'll do the decree. If it needs to be published, once that's all done, or if it's waived, they're just usually allowing that without a motion. The request to waive the publication, sometimes those get marked up for a motion, for a motion hearing also. And again, I just usually make the request that it be waived. And a lot of courts will waive that request. But I've heard of cases where the judges want to talk to somebody and have a hearing on that issue. Again, lawyers, would then do most of the talking for you. And I would say then they're going to understand the law and be able to advocate and know what the judge is looking for in order to allow those. And I don't know if the experience is different on those issues in Boston, but that's my experience around here.
That's all consistent with my understanding. Miriam, I was going to ask you if you ever put forth a reason for why to waive publication, and if you've ever had any kind of interaction with the judge that's like, set a standard, because I'm not aware of any, and I know judges often will allow them, but I don't know the standard.
Yeah, I mean, they are, the petitions are supposed to be published, except for good cause. And so the question of the day is, what constitutes good cause to not have to publish that citation? I have found that a lot of our local judges very easily will waive publication based on, a one-liner of, this is about gender identity, or it's a personal matter. The person is only changing, a first name. They're not really changing like their surname, which might, again, raise a red flag. But a lot of judges will just waive it without anything further. Some judges, though, require some, reason to present to make a finding of good cause. Some are good with like statistics about the increased risk for transgender people, or going through this and then having that information be published. And then there are judges who I've encountered who require more, and they really want to see a personal basis, a personal reason, some foundation as to why the publication is harmful or potentially risky for that particular person in their life. And they want to see an affidavit that is much more specific. Sometimes the petition is denied, or the request is denied, with an opportunity to sort of resubmit and to offer a little bit more information, but it's not always predictable. So we're seeing a lot of variety around here.
So if someone has started this process without representation, without, working with an attorney, and they are how would my first part of this question is, how would they be notified that the judge wants a hearing? And second, would you then recommend that that as soon as they find out about this, that they seek representation?
If you file a petition and a motion to like waive publication, and the judge wants to have a hearing, or the court wants to schedule a hearing, they'll send a notice to the petitioner. Your address is on that petition, and you would get notified of a hearing. The courts are doing both sort of in person and Zoom hearings still. I think that varies depending on the court and the judge sometimes. In terms of once you get that notice, if you get that notice, or sometimes the court might just deny the request to waive publication, and then you have an option to file again, you know, a request based on like a new basis, or you can withdraw your petition for the name change, or you can just go ahead and publish the citation. I don't see why you wouldn't just consult with a lawyer sort of on those next steps if you don't already have somebody on board. I think it's a good idea to really understand so that you know, so that you're not, just so you know what your rights are and you're not giving too much information, but enough to get what you're looking for and what would be helpful.
Great, thank you. Chris, go ahead.
I just want to add to that, like, you can get in contact with the lawyer pretty easily today. At least in Massachusetts, contact MTPC, contact Gives, contact GLAD, contact, the clinic in Northampton. Sorry, I'm forgetting the name, Transhealth.
Yeah.
And if any one of these sources is going to connect you with legal help when you need it. So like, don't be afraid to reach out, because that's what we're here for.
Yes, it's a great point, Chris. Thank you. So the next question that I have kind of also builds off of this about the publication. So I know some courts, like you said, Miriam, just, you don't even have to submit the motion to waive the publication. I know when I changed my name in Middlesex County, I didn't have to file anything. The judge just automatically waived it. I know that this varies a lot from courthouse to courthouse, from judge to judge. So, I mean, in that instance, if it's not waived, that is a situation in which, as we've already talked about, you want to find some kind of legal assistance or representation. If you are trying to avoid publication, or you can go ahead and publish. I guess, a lot of people's concerns are about the cost it costs to publish, because I think a lot of people, especially in the Boston area, think about the Boston Globe as like the place to publish, and that's, outrageously expensive. But there are other resources in other places to post, like smaller local newspapers. Like, I know I used to live in Somerville, and Somerville has like a local newspaper that is really inexpensive to publish in. Again, we want to avoid this, but does anyone else have any kind of advice or tips for publication, or, avoiding that?
Can I also, here in Northampton, we have the Daily Hampshire Gazette. It's a couple $100, to publish. But I wish that I knew the answer to the question of whether you can have that cost waived if you qualify for a waiver of other fees. I'm not sure if it includes that cost of publication, like for filing fees and the citation. It's an affidavit of indigency that you would file with the court, and if it's allowed, then a lot of those fees for the petition can be waived. What I don't know is if it includes publication, but I think it might.
Oh, that's a good
question. I would just keep it in mind. I don't know why I don't know that. I think because I just haven't had those two things come together in any of my cases.
At the very least, I think that when you're providing good cause, or when you're trying to justify seeking a waiver of publication, using indigency as an additional factor for why, or using an inability to pay as an additional factor for why the judge should waive publication might be an effective tactic.
So unless anyone else has anything to add about kind of the court orders or the name change part, I'm going to kind of move into the next steps of the process. So really, at least in Massachusetts, now I think maybe this has changed since I have looked at some of these resources, but I think you still have to update next your Social Security card, your information with the Social Security Administration, and then you can go to the RMV to update your state ID or your driver's license. Is that correct?
I think there's a little flexibility in there, but in my understanding, that's the easiest way or most streamlined way to do it. I've gotten several questions around prioritizing state ID or driver's license first. But in my experience, we recommend Social Security first, then driver's license, mass ID, then passport.
There's a new hiccup with this. If you want a real ID in Massachusetts, you need to have the Social Security be consistent with it. So you have to go to Social Security before you can go get your driver's license if you want a real ID in Massachusetts.
I knew there was something, and that was it. Thank you, Chris. So that's related to real IDs, which I think are now required for air travel domestically.
They will be very shortly.
They will be, okay.
Yeah.
So that's if you want to use your ID, your state ID for traveling domestically and not needing to use a passport or other form of federal ID.
Can I just add, though, that I think in the coming months, we're expecting Social Security to streamline its process for updating name and gender marker changes so that it doesn't require medical notice and everything. That's what we're anticipating, but it hasn't happened yet.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. So there's more detail on, at least on MTPC's website, and I'm assuming in the resources on GLAAD's website in terms of the processes that you know for Social Security Administration. So we're not really going to get into, and also for passport. So we're not really going to get into like the nitty-gritty details of those processes. Also because those are kind of standardized forms because they're federal. So the process is much more uniform than it is for legal name changes. There are, kind of thinking about this, the next question I have for the panel is, what are certain complications that people might encounter throughout this process? We've already touched on some of it with the name change. What about with some of the other, like, identity documents?
Well, there are a couple Q&As that seem like probably relevant here. So one person says that they have a birth certificate and marriage license in New York, but now live and work in Massachusetts and have a Mass driver's license. So do they have to change their name in New York and then in Mass, or how should they do it? This is Chris and Miriam. See your wheelhouse.
Well, Miriam and I both know that the interstate stuff is always where the most complications arise, right? And fortunately, New York State is actually a really friendly venue for getting things changed and for doing what needs to be done. I believe the question that was in the chat there was a little more specific about where you go to get the name change. And I'm pretty sure universally where you live is where you would go to file for a name change. There are probably exceptions to that, but as a general rule of thumb, wherever you're a resident, that's where it is that you need to go to ask for a legal name change. But then you go back to New York State to ask them to update your whatever documents you have there. You have to go to Massachusetts for whatever documents you have in Massachusetts, and it can be sometimes very challenging to navigate all these different governmental systems that don't always work together well and don't always make it easy for you. So yeah. And
I'm not sure about how common this is, but I know many states you actually can't change your name on your marriage license or your marriage certificate. Is that correct? Because I think that's true in Massachusetts, right?
I don't want to concede that that's true in Massachusetts because I know there have been examples of like successfully navigating that process, but it is like pulling teeth on birth certificates and every other kind of, marriage certificates and every other kind of ancillary document that identifies you. It can just be really, really hard. A lot of times those departments of vital records view those documents as like some really critical, record of a thing that happened at a moment in time, as opposed to something that identifies who you are today. And it can be really, really challenging.
Yeah, and I think that same bill that you had mentioned earlier, Chris, would also it was going to impact all state forms. So that would also apply to marriage certificates in terms of changing names and gender and removing gender marker from all of these forms. So I guess kind of just to add on to answering this question, I changed my name legally in Massachusetts. My birth certificate is in New York. No problems there. New York's really, really easy and really great in my experience, with changing your birth certificate. The best part about it for me, having New York birth certificate is that they don't actually amend your birth certificate in New York. They reissue it completely with your legal name change and gender marker change. But similarly, that as Chris said, you can only change your name on the birth certificate at the same time that you're changing the gender marker on your birth certificate, and you can't change it after that. And that's the only way it's possible outside of a spelling error correction to change your first name on your birth certificate. Okay, so let me just take a look here because we are getting a little short on time, and I want to make sure we have enough time to answer the other questions. See here. Well, Chris, this is something that, we've talked about a little bit, and you've brought up, but how can changes in laws and procedures and policies impact this process for folks? And also, what are some potential changes that we might see in the near future?
Yeah, the things to be watching out for are states that have X markers on certain documents and not other documents. That's something that's an evolving area of law right now, and law and policy right now. And we're seeing a lot of changes. One thing to watch out for, this is kind of a wild story of something that just happened last year in New Hampshire. So up until last year in New Hampshire, they required a medical attestation for updating your gender marker on your driver's license, okay? And somebody was trying to get an X marker on their driver's license, and they may have not filled out the form the right way, and they got arrested for fraud because I don't know, overzealous police who worked for the DMV in New Hampshire decided that that was the appropriate response to somebody being a little bit sloppy with the form that they were filling out because they're just trying to get an updated license. And so I just want to call attention to the fact that you have to be kind of aware and careful of how you're vulnerable if you're as a transgender person going and approaching these agencies for help, and so just watch out for things like that because it's unfair, but you can easily be the target for somebody who doesn't understand why people want to change their gender markers and names on their records in the first place. And so I just want to kind of flag that. I mean, the outcome of that was good because we were able to intervene and stop the prosecution, and as a result change the process in New Hampshire so it's no longer an issue, but it was just a really terrible thing that happened to this person. So so that's one thing I want to flag just in terms of paying attention to law and policy. And then, other things is that there's a lot of litigation going around about birth certificates across the country. So some states where they're just kind of giving a really hard line, no, you can never change your gender marker or your name on your birth certificate. We're seeing some positive outcomes in litigation. And a recent example is Ohio, where previously there was no way to do it. Now there's no way to do it because the Ohio courts are just making it impossible to get the court orders you need or whatever. But if you get a court order from another state and you bring it into Ohio, then you can the vital records there is being. So anyway, the point is there's just a complicated morass of all the different kind of laws and policies across the country. It's really annoying to have to sift through, and that's kind of the time when you need to ask for help from a lawyer.
I'll just add two bright spots to some of that too in terms of legislation. One, no longer needing a doctor's letter for passport gender marker updates. So that's a big win, makes it a little bit easier for everybody. And then second, this is still pending, but Ayanna Pressley's bill recently around credit reporting. So when you change your name, often in the past, if you change your first name, your credit report and credit file can split or be fully invisible, and it can lead to a lot of long-term repercussions financially for trans folks or folks changing their first names. And so they're working right now that on a bill that would prohibit dead names on credit reporting. So you therefore would have your or singular file, just as if you're changing your name due to marriage or divorce, which requires no additional paperwork or notification to the credit bureaus. Yet for folks changing their first or middle names, it does. So hopefully we see that progress through, but that would be a big win as we look at the other places that you need to be aware of changing and updating your name and gender marker beyond the ID documents.
So we're running a little bit into our Q&A time, but we have one more question that I really wanted to get to, which is after someone has kind of has changed their name, has updated their identity documents, what are other things that they'll have to consider? Because like, for instance, there's, our names are on everything. So I don't know, Luke, if you want to take the first stab at this.
Yeah. So with Namesake, like I said, we're streamlining the process. And so right now, someone can go onto the platform and get all of the completed forms for the ID documents we just mentioned. But our next kind of phase and goal for the next portion would be helping people with this piece of updating your name and all the other important places, because it can be overwhelming. I think the average American has like over 100 online accounts. And so, not to mention the other kind of key places. So in my experience, I think what I tell people to prioritize is, again, credit bureaus, your bank accounts, your health insurance, your benefits, your school records, university records, your student loans, right? There are many, many places. But like Kelsey mentioned, there are some helpful checklists that you can use to do this. MTPC has a great one that kind of walks you through how to prioritize those. But we're working on hopefully making this easier and more streamlined for people. Yeah,
I mean, and this is something that, especially on things where it's not super urgent or important, it's really easy to miss or forget them. I mean, I legally changed my name almost 7 years ago, and I'm still coming across things that I need to update my name on. And like, there's some things like that I've just like not found a way to change my name on, like my CVS extra care card. No idea. You can call them. They're like, we don't know how to do that. So just, warning you in advance, a little notice. There are some really unimportant things where you might not be able to change it, and it really sucks, but that's just kind of, systems are not built for trans people, and that's just kind of, the epitome of that. So I mean, like, health insurance, home or renter's insurance, your mortgage company, your bank, your, don't forget to update your name on your lease with your landlord, on your car loan, your car insurance, with your employer. The list goes on and on. But anywhere where you've signed any kind of legal document, like a lease, a bill of sale that you need to have as evidence, maybe in some cases you'll be able to use that your court order name change with that. The thing that I have like this, I don't even know how to approach this yet, because I'm still trying to figure out the Treasury Department. I have US savings bonds in my old name, and there's no process. It's like, send them to us and we'll figure it out. So, there's all of these things to think about, and that's something I was like, these are things I don't have to think about for like 25 more years, but I should think about them now while I'm talking about this with everyone.
Hey, one to throw out there for young people is your vaccine records and the vaccines in the state registry. We see this all the time when people go off to college.
That is a great point.
We started changing them pretty routinely.
Yeah, your school, I used to work in higher education, and I helped a lot of students update their records at schools with varying levels of success and trauma. Were you going to add something, Chris?
Professional associations, even if you're a member of any professional associations, don't forget, because that could like harm you professionally.
Yeah. So we're getting a little short on time, so I'm just going to jump into the Q&A here. So the next question in the Q&A is, if someone is going through a divorce, can they change their name and gender marker, or do they have to wait until after the divorce?
I'll go ahead, Miriam. I mean, the answer to this is that you can go ahead and go through this process while a divorce is ongoing, and unfortunately, it will probably cause complications for you that you don't. That'll create a headache, and so that's definitely a situation in which you want to consult legal advice. So the question is just how important it is, like what your current needs are in terms of updating your name and documentation, and evaluating that against what kind of complications it might cause for what's going on with your divorce process. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was having trouble finding my unmute button. I've had a couple of recent cases where divorcing couples, they're like in the process of the divorce, and somebody is transitioning and changing their name or trying to figure out the order of things. I was mildly mortified to come into a case where the parties had been in mediation out of state, and it was just sort of decided by the spouse and the mediator that they were going to use the old name, this person's former name, even though they had already had a legal name change, because the spouse wanted to divorce the same person that they had married. But it raised some really interesting questions, and we kind of revisited that. And I've had another case where it was sort of like mid-process, and we went ahead and did the name change before filing the divorce paperwork, so that the divorce paperwork could include this person's new name, especially for purposes of like parenting time and other things that are going to have some life to them going forward after the divorce. You want to that person to be able to pick up their divorce agreement and judgment and have the court have that correct information, or else it's going to be confusing down the road. I think it's more sort of these practical questions and issues. Some courts will also impound name changes. Most of our judges out here in Western Mass don't do that. I think that, unless there's specific cause, I think in the Boston area, more judges are doing that routinely with name changes. So there's just such a wide variety in that practice also, in terms of like what's public and what's not, to think of in connection with your divorce.
Thank you both. So next question is a little bit longer. It says, I represent a public high school and often get questions from my district's lower schools as well. My understanding is that as of age 14, students can legally change their name in schools' student information systems. And they're unsure about gender markers. However, it is not necessarily best practice when working to maintain positive, lasting relationships with families. Can you speak to ways to work with families to honor a student name change in an SIS, particularly if or when the family is opposed?
So the person who asked this question, I would love to have a longer, more in-depth conversation with you one-on-one about this. So if possible, reach out to me because I'd love to talk about this. But I just want to say that it's a spot-on observation that sometimes changing school records. So under FERPA, any school records that are maintained by the school, including whatever is in SIS, can be accessed by parents at any time. So it really does, and students who are 14 years old don't always understand the implications that might have. So you're absolutely correct. It can totally be undermining, really sensitive relational issues within a family for a kid to change. And that doesn't mean the kid doesn't have the right to do it, but the kid should definitely have, someone there to kind of help them understand what the implications might be. As far as what school's role is in terms of I just feel like that's not a legal question, so I'm not going to try to answer it here, but I really do appreciate the question because I think it's the right thing to be asking.
Thanks, Chris. Someone has also put in the chat and this is in relation to the previous question, which is also urging parents to consider how custody can play into trans kids needing to change their name and gender markers, in addition to parents who are changing their name as a part of that process. So the next question is, in terms of university-related things, what would be done if colleges or universities already put preferred names, not the current legal name, on most or all things like student ID card or accounts for the college? So I've done a lot of this work, so I'll go ahead and answer this one. You know, this is really important for everything from financial aid to medical care, to just, you know, your educational records. So if you legally change your name, you definitely still need to update your legal name with the university because it can impact your ability to receive federal loans or student aid. It can impact your scholarships. And you also want to make sure that it's updated on your transcripts. If you ever need to access your transcripts again, you want to make sure that name change has happened. You know, whether that's for applying for grad school or whatever, that's definitely a really important thing. I mean, I changed my name well after I finished school, and I still updated my name with my college so that it would be up to date on my transcripts, and also in all of the communications that they send me from like the Alumni Association, et cetera. So I definitely, you know, most colleges in Massachusetts have pretty simple processes for updating these things. In some cases, not so much for gender markers, but definitely if you legally change your name and you are currently in school, you should change that. You know, as soon as you have that, all of your kind of documents updated. And I would say the same thing about your employer. You know, make sure that once you have that, that is definitely somewhere you need to update that, because, you know, I mean, even if you're a student and you're employed as a student, it'll impact your ability to receive money through student employment. So we have one final question. In a scenario with relatively few complications, what is a realistic timeline from start to finish for changing over the key ID docs? You know, speaking from my own personal experience, in which I had no complications, and through my own love of bureaucratic torture, I completed the process in less than 2 months. So that was all of my documentation, including my birth certificate. So I would say the minimum time you can expect is like, you know, probably somewhere around 2 months. Realistically, it's going to take longer than that. I don't know if anyone else would like to add to that process, to that answer.
Just that it depends. Yeah, it also can vary depending on where you're doing the name change, like even county to county.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, and actually Chris could probably speak to this more than I can in the specifics, but especially for some out-of-state requirements there, and you mentioned this earlier, referred to it, that some states require a court finding or determination of a gender change, which is just like astonishing to me. But that's not just a quick petition. That's a complaint in equity. It's a pleading in court that can take many, many months if what you're really trying to, you know, if you're trying to do, I don't remember, Chris, if it was New Hampshire, or there have just been some cases that we throw to GLAAD because they know what they're doing, where there have been, you know, requests for these court orders that are not sort of just part of our regular process. That can take a long time.
Yeah, I mean, there are states like that require these, like, and I only ever get involved in cases personally when it is these complicated and prolonged cases. So yeah, I think of these cases as lasting, you know, a year or whatever, from beginning to end. I don't see this as a short process at all, but that's because I'm only dealing with things that are complicated. So
yeah. And just, I will, you know, we're about to close here. And just one thing that I want to add is if you are working to update your birth certificate and you were born in a state that is outside of New England or the Northeast, there are some really great resources out there through the Trans Law Center and Lambda Legal and the National Center for Trans Equality that can put you in touch with resources that can and people and organizations in those states that can really help you with those processes. I mean, I know folks that have trans folks that have changed their name and gender markers on their birth certificates in Texas. So, you know, there are people that are doing that work on the ground. So if you need that kind of assistance outside of New England, there are definitely still resources for you there. And you know, that's it for our questions. I know we are just a couple minutes over right now. And that's pretty much everything we've got. We're going to send out some follow-up info to you all in email for all of you who registered and attended. It'll include the link to the recording of this webinar, and it'll include some more information about Namesake and how to get involved and how to, you know, start using some of these resources. We'll also include the resources that we've all talked about here in that email so that it's easily accessible for you all. So unless there's anything else that any of our panelists would like to add, I'm just going to close up real quick and thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been really great to talk with you all. If you want to get in contact with MTPC, and getting in contact with me or our organization, that would probably be the easiest way to get in touch with any of the other people that are in this webinar. So I am going to put my email address in the chat, and you can reach out to me and I'll be happy to either help you if I can or direct you to any of the other folks that are here or to appropriate resources. Thanks everyone so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Transhealth Northampton for hosting us. And thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. Have a great night.
Thank you.